This week, we're joined by Joe Sullivan of Gorilla 76 Marketing. He's the founder there, and he also is the host of the Manufacturing Excellence podcast. We cover a lot of great topics today with Joe. He is a specialist in B2B marketing. And some of the stuff we covered were customer segmentations, the value of webinars, as many as you may have in today's society, and also whether trade shows are really going to be around in the future.
Yeah, we get into how to cultivate the contacts and ultimately gain more contacts so you can add more customers and infiltrate them via your marketing. And it's just a great episode where Joe talks about all of his marketing experience, in which honestly we should be paying him, because I think there's so much to be learned from it that it's definitely worth a listen for anybody looking at marketing and how to ultimately promote their company on the internet. So, tune in.
Thanks.
Welcome to the Robot Thought Leaders Podcast with Zach Tompkinson and Chris Savoya, bringing you in-depth interviews with industry experts driving change in the robot world.
So, yeah, I guess what is your strategy when it comes to putting content out there? From what I've seen is obviously like shorter, the more attention span you get. I think you obviously put more to it than just the clip of the video. So I'm just curious of what your kind of maybe 60-second strategy is on posting to LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So I use my podcast as like a pillar platform. So we essentially, it's called the Manufacturing Executive. We interview manufacturing executives. That's sort of the target, but also people who, are influencers in the space or can be helpful to manufacturing executives based on whatever it is that they, their area of expertise is. But I conduct these interviews. I put the spotlight on my guests. I try to, I always have a pre-call with them to try to, figure out if, few talking points. So I can come really prepared to ask some good questions and they roughly know what to expect. And then I will, after we record the episode, I always do them on Zoom, even though most people consume the full episode in audio format. I just go back, I listen to them myself, and I timestamp them for maybe the 3 to 5, golden nuggets that the guest had, where it was like, okay, what he said from minute 13 to 14 and a half was brilliant. Really? I'm going to clip that out. I'm going to use the video. I've got a template I use. And
sure.
So I'll push that out on LinkedIn. But what I always try to do is I'll put a headline on it that's relevant. I'll caption it. And then I'll usually just write a short post to accompany it that sort of, puts it in context for somebody, or maybe adds a little bit of my spin to it as an introduction to that piece. And then the little things I do, I always just link back to the full episode in the first comment. LinkedIn likes you to wants people consuming content right there on LinkedIn. So like when you drop a link in your post, they automatically devalue it. So I'll drop the link into the first comment, little things like that. Yeah. And then sometimes I'll tag people that I think would maybe add to the conversation. Other people who, I've talked to about that topic or who I know would be interested, and often they'll start engaging, and the more engagement that happens, the more visibility it gets. So that's kind of the strategy in a nutshell.
Yeah. And you usually post like a few posts from the same podcast that you've shot. I see.
Yeah. What I always do when I go back and timestamp it, I'll just, if there wasn't much in there, I might only have 1 or 2. I did one last week with Mike Weinberg. He's the author of one of the all-time best-selling sales books, a few of them actually. And he was just a star guest. I had 8 little clips. I put my videographer to work on that one. Yeah, I mean, it was just spewing brilliance. The whole thing was amazing. So, that one, I've got a whole bunch. I'm probably going to drip out one a week for the next 2 months, frankly. And nice. And so, it just depends on how good the content was, frankly, and what nuggets I could pull out of it. I'll also, I'll pull, because it's often a conversation. It's two-way. I'll go back and forth. I'll add some color to it. And sometimes I'll pull out those little clips of me too and take them out of context of the podcast. I'll make a little audiogram and post those, or a video of just me on that part that, I'll just sort of remove from the episode. So a lot of good stuff comes out of these
How much time do you spend on this, on average, daily or weekly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I spend on LinkedIn specifically, I spend usually 30 to 45 minutes a day, probably 5 to 6 days a week. I try not to work on the weekends much. I like to, frankly, I love waking up early on the weekends before. I've got 2 little kids. I like getting some stuff done, like the things I want to work on before they're even awake. And then I put it aside. But yeah, that it takes commitment. Like LinkedIn is, there was a time in social media 10 years ago where, you'd use Hootsuite or one of these tools and you just blast out messages across 50 social platforms, like half of which don't even exist anymore. And that just does not work at this day and age. There was a time where that was fine for visibility, but now it's really about engagement. You need to have great content that people are actually engaging in, because that's the stuff that gets more visibility and it leads to meaningful conversation. So I actually dedicate time. It's one of my morning things. It's one of the first things I do is I write something unique for LinkedIn almost every weekday, and post it. And a lot of times it's something that accompanies my videos. Now, time stamping the podcast and clipping that stuff out, that's probably, for me, an extra hour to 2 hours a week, frankly, because I have a weekly episode. And then in addition to that, I've got a videographer who's actually doing the video editing, and he's putting time
that's
in.
awesome.
So it helps having a team, like we're an agency, we're a marketing agency. I've got all kinds of skill sets here to make use of that not everybody has at their disposal. But there are companies like, do you guys know Chris Lukey, Manufacturing Happy Hour?
Yeah.
So you should look him up if you're not familiar. He'd be a really, really good guest for you guys too. But he's been doing this for years. But he's, I know he hired a company that does micro content specifically. Like that's what they do. Called Content 10X, and he's had a great experience with them, breaking out the clips from these. And really, the same thing applies. Like what I do with podcasts, you could do with if you have an episodic webinar series where you're doing monthly webinars. Like same thing. People do webinars and they let the content die. I think a lot of the value in it is, what do you do with the recording and how do you push that stuff back out there organically in social media channels, on YouTube, put a paid ad budget behind it and tell LinkedIn or Facebook to show this little clip from this webinar to people with these job titles and these geographies with these interests. So it really can apply to any type of content you're creating.
Cool. Yeah. That's a good segue. I wanted to talk to you about webinars too.
Yeah.
Again, a huge thing in this industry. I think there's a lot of trade magazines and a lot of industry magazines, things like that, where you can do webinars with them. There's also the capability to do your own self-hosted webinars. And then there's also IMTS, like Spark demos, things like that. So, what value do you see in webinars? And if you had to pick some for your clients, what would you look for out of that group, or possibly others I didn't mention?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm a huge advocate for webinars. In fact, we did an episode on this on my podcast recently with my strategy director, Matt Chanella, he came from the manufacturing world. He worked at a welding equipment manufacturer for 4+ years and had a lot of success with webinars there. But so we did an episode on that. We followed it with an article called something like 18 ways to do a better manufacturing webinar. And but hitting on a few things that we love about that platform. It's a way to humanize yourself. And if you're doing webinars, turn on the webcam. Let's not throw a PowerPoint deck up there. Especially now after the last year, everybody's comfortable with this technology and stuff, but it's a great way to humanize yourself. A lot of clients I have and companies I've talked to in manufacturing, they've been doing lunch and learns one-on-one, in person for companies for years. Well, this is really a very similar thing. It's just, you can do it at scale. And I'm not discouraging lunch and learns one-on-one. Like that's fantastic. People should absolutely be doing those, especially if they're being successful. But this is a way to scale what's going on there across companies. You can organically to your email list and in social media, as well as put an ad budget behind it. You can promote the event and draw people there who don't even know who you are yet, but fit your ideal customer profile. It's a way to humanize yourself. one big thing about webinars that I think is super important is that you, and Matt and I talked about this on our podcast, but you need to neutralize your product or your service. And, product webinars are fine for further down the funnel buyers, but a majority of your audience is not in buying mode. And this is a great way for you to educate, demonstrate thought leadership with different SMEs within your company. And then something we also talk about a lot is how important the Q&A session is. So it shouldn't just be you spewing information at your audience. Like, you should teach maybe 20 to 30 minutes, but reserve the same amount of time to take questions and encourage questions along the way. Because, the way I've described it is like, this is your first sales call. Like, your content is your first sales call. And there's no better way to do that than a webinar. This is where people are vetting you, or they're learning like, okay, this person understands me. They've seen my issues before. So I just think that's great. And the questions you get in the Q&A will provide other content ideas. It'll give you something to follow up with people about. And just be able to establish relationships. So those are, a few of the main points.
I agree with the Q&A part, especially. Like, I've done webinars before, and also listening to them, you can really tell if you're talking to the right person, or if you're listening to the right person, I should say. Absolutely. By the quality of their answers.
Yeah, because there's something to being able to answer questions on the fly. Everybody can prepare a presentation and BS their way through it, frankly. But great content, that's the starting place. But then when people can dive in and ask questions about it and how it applies to their situation and start to get advice about that, and you can answer that on the spot, or one of your engineers can, because they're deep technical experts, then you start to look really great, right?
How do you nurture people that, a lot of webinars will produce a big old contact list, right? Maybe you can qualify if they ask like a good question at the end or something like that. But that's a small percentage of the attendees. So how do you nurture and start to further qualify a list out of a webinar?
Yeah, great question. Because so many companies think, okay, great, I just built this list. Now I'm going to get into selling mode afterwards, and I'm going to try to book sales calls with everybody on it. When a majority, probably 90% of the people there are not even in buying mode. They're trying to learn and educate themselves more. And so I think the mistake a lot of companies make is they leave those events and they start, trying to sell to people who aren't buying. And you do more damage than good there. So it's a great question, Chris, because I think that what you need to do in these scenarios is, well, you identify people who are showing some buying intent, or who did ask those questions. You follow up and you just say, hey, I know you asked this question. Here's another piece of content we created about this. Or a case study that, I was thinking about you, and this case study is very relevant, I think, and could help you. So if you've got something that you can send them, great. And just say, hey, if you want to jump on a call, I'll go grab, this sales engineer, or, our CEO or whoever is appropriate. And let's chat about it and answer any more of your questions. No pressure. We're not going to hard sell you or anything. So that's a great way to do that. As for the rest of the group, which is who you're asking about, I think a great way to do it is, what can you do to consistently start delivering more value to these individuals? We're big fans of, when you do webinars, don't make it a one and done thing you do once a year. We talk about the idea of like the Netflixing of content, or can you produce something once a month or every 2 weeks, or whatever you can handle. Like we have at Gorilla, we have Industrial Marketing Live. Every 3 weeks, we have a webinar that is focused on B2B sales and marketing, for really more marketing focused, but B2B marketing for manufacturing people, specifically the marketing directors and marketing coordinators inside of those organizations. And so we are constantly delivering these, and we have like 200 some people who have a Zoom calendar invite recurring on their calendar, and probably 40 or 50 show up every time. And that list is just growing. So that's one way to do it, is make your webinars episodic. So people always know when the next one's coming, and you've got an email list and you promote those ahead of time. The other thing is, newsletters. The typical manufacturing newsletter is, it goes out every month or whatever, and it's here's the new customer that we won, and here's who won the company dodgeball tournament, and here's here's Cheryl's new dog from down the hall, or whatever. Nobody cares, right? Like maybe your family and friends care, and that's great, but But if you're sending that kind of stuff to prospects, it's just gonna get overlooked. Like if you can use a newsletter to consistently deliver value, like focus on who your ideal customer is, what things they care about, what issues they're trying to solve, what questions you're getting on sales calls, and start to produce content, whether it's something like this, a podcast episode, a written piece of content, a webinar, and then start distributing that stuff. Use your newsletter as a vehicle. And now you're nurturing those people that attended your webinar, and you're continuing to create more value and trust for them.
Yeah.
So you bring up a great point, and I'm curious of your thoughts here, because from my perspective, and I think from a lot of others, the B2C market and way of emailing every customer from a marketing or lead generation standpoint and trying to penetrate to new customers is dying. I mean, I don't open emails much anymore. I get bombarded and there's just so much spam, and you got to filter and unsubscribe, and there's just, that seems to be dying. But in the B2B world, I think we rely heavily on it. Do you see is that going to happen in the B2B world? Do you see is that happening already? And what, if I'm wrong, why? And if I'm right, what's next?
That's a good question, Zach. There's more and more noise every day. There's just becoming more and more noise. So I think you're right in that sense. I mean, that's the trend, and it's becoming true in almost any channel, frankly, but email is still working and it's still viable in the B2B space and with manufacturers. The way you can differentiate yourself is, like I said earlier, to use that venue to create value, not to just talk about yourself. That's a mistake probably 95% of B2B companies make, is it's just, they're not thinking about what their buyer actually cares about. But if you can stay focused on that and create valuable content, you're going to probably get a really great reception to your emails. So that's my short take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question around the episodic stuff you're talking about, webinars. How do you continually build on that? And, if you have people that show up every month, are you going back to the same material over and over again? How do you simultaneously nurture new people with an episodic series, as well as continue to keep people interested that are already up to speed on the concepts that you've been talking about for a while?
Sure. So, as far as new people rolling in who maybe didn't attend the last 5 that you did or whatever, I mean, you should absolutely be recording these things. You should be building a library of this content on YouTube. You should be streaming these episodes into your website and your learning center or resource center, and have show notes associated with them. I'm not practicing what I preach yet, but we're about to be. We do that with our podcast episodes. Every episode that I publish once a week, there are show notes with the episodes streamed right in, and links out to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher and Google Podcasts and everything. But do the same thing with webinars. Have a tag, a category in your learning center or blog or whatever you call it, that is all your recordings, and put them there, and don't put them behind a form. Like the form, you're just going to, you want as many eyeballs on this as possible. So that's at least my take on it. So, but that's one way to do it, I think. And then you create the micro content from it. Like we've talked about a little bit, where you break down these videos into shorter clips and distribute those. So the stuff becomes evergreen. All the stuff you've got, you recirculate it every once in a while in the social channels and via your email newsletters and things like that. If a topic was really popular, come back around to it after a few months and do it again. Bring in a different subject matter expert that might offer a slightly different perspective on it, or do a panel discussion or something like that you just moderate and let 2 experts debate it. So I think that's, as far as content that is passed. As far as how do you keep fresh ideas coming, how do you keep people engaged? I think the best way to do it is just, what are you hearing directly from the mouths of the people you are trying to reach? So talked about the Q&A session earlier, right? What questions you're getting there, make sure you're logging all those and they're not just disappearing after the webinar. Like, what are the questions people are dropping into the Q&A? Because those are probably things people want to hear about more. Another thing to do is after your email or after your webinar is complete, the next day, send out the recording to everybody who was on it. Cause a lot of people will sign up, but then they can't attend or just decided not to. And so send them to the recording, but ask in that email, say, are there any topics related to this or otherwise that you'd really like to hear about? And just solicit, ideas from them directly. They're the people you're trying to reach. What do they want to know? The other thing is, like, we're huge advocates at Gorilla, my agency, around doing dedicated customer interviews and voice of customer work where you are having calls specifically to understand, the buying process for these individuals, what their daily job is like, what issues they run into, what things they're trying to achieve in their roles, but at a company level as well. And so if you're doing that kind of work, which you should be, if you're not, that kind of stuff will just feed ideas, for all kinds of content marketing, blog post ideas, webinar ideas, podcast ideas, short video ideas. So I think for most companies out there, unless what you sell is just super commoditized, like, we work with companies who are much more, very complex, longer sales cycles, dealing with committees of buyers. Yeah, and that's robotics, right? So like, you're not going to run out of ideas. I promise you, I mean,
dive into each application vertical and have a ton of time in each one. Totally.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing you can do is split into different audiences. If you do, if you're heavy in automotive over here and then heavier in, whatever, food and beverage or medical or something over here, like now start catering your content to that audience, and it becomes, your audience shrinks, but your content becomes more dialed in and valuable to the people who are in that space.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
And in fact, those are even industries where, if you're talking automotive applications for robotics, it's just about every application can be in the automotive industry. So even within that segment, you can break it apart in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quick question. With adding to this list, how do you, what is your strategy of getting this new eyeballs in front of the product that you're putting out there? Obviously, LinkedIn is one way of trying to gather more, but curious of some of your kind of strategies that you deploy to get more people into the lists and on those webinars.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I would start first of all with your existing contacts. A lot of times when I go in and do discovery with a company or audit what they've got going on, one of the first questions I'm asking is, how big's your email list? How organized is it? How outdated is it? And a lot of times what I hear is, well, yeah, we got a couple thousand people in there, but across our sales team and our account managers, we've probably got 10,000 more in their Outlook accounts that are just, so I think one of the first things to do is let's lean into people who already know you and ideally like and trust you already. And let's start there and let's get your email list in order and let's start with that. Right. But then what I would do from there is, cause we got to get to people who don't know you yet, or maybe know you, but not much about you and fit your ideal customer profile. So we always talk about, like, you focus on an audience, you make amazing assets for them, which could be the webinar or other things. And then you move into content distribution. And when we talk about distribution, we're essentially talking about how do we reach as much of your total addressable market as possible with consistency, delivering your value proposition, delivering insightful content that addresses those things that they care about, their pains, their objectives, their common questions. So what you do is, I think there's, there are a variety of things. First of all, there's SEO. It's a longer term play, but if you're creating amazing content, let's use SEO best practices. It's not rocket science. Publish that stuff on your website in written form. If there's a video component to it too, even better. But that's not going to happen overnight. Like that, this is 15 years ago, it might have not anymore. There's just this oversaturation of content. You want yours to be the best, and you'll win in the long term if you're doing that with consistency. But the things you want to do to generate to awareness and generate demand in the short term, you want to, we're huge advocates of using the social media channels, honestly, but putting a paid budget behind it. So you're, posting organically from your company account's probably going to accomplish very little unless, well, like you guys are a large, really well-known company. There might be some value there, but like LinkedIn, for example, they want to see content from individual human beings and thought leaders and stuff. So there's a way to distribute that way. And if you're doing that with consistency, you again, over the long term, you can win doing it that way. But we're advocates of putting some paid budget behind it. And you got to figure out where your audience is and where they're active. But LinkedIn, Facebook, both great places, depending on what you sell and the price point of your product and how big the audience is, et cetera. But you can tell these channels, like this piece of content, this short video I pulled out of a podcast episode like this, or a webinar, a clip from a webinar, one of those like golden nugget clips, or this blog post we wrote with this image associated with it. LinkedIn or Facebook show this to people who fit this profile and fill in the blank, right? Geography, job title, actual company they work at. These social platforms can build lookalike audiences to, identify other people that look like the ones you're plugging into the system. Yep. But the thing to do though, like what's really important to understand is like, you need to be targeting very tightly. And then you have to also consider that channels like LinkedIn and Facebook, like people don't go to these channels to look for robots. Like they're not like, all right, I need a robotics consultant or a specific robot. I'm going to go to LinkedIn or Facebook and look for that. That's not how it works. Yeah. But these people are active on that channel. And because this is their job title, they have this engineering job title and they are in this geography and they have these interests, LinkedIn may show them, they're going to show them this little video clip. Yeah. And when they're sitting on the couch at night watching SportsCenter and this thing drops in front of their feed because they're sitting here flipping through their phone, they stop and they watch. Yeah. Right. And
that's the whole thing with like, stop posting your best content on your website because no one's going to your website to consume content. They're going to the places that they consume content for personal reasons, for, whatever they find as enjoyment, just habitual reasons. I mean, right. Obviously we're at a point where we're so ingrained and social media is such a big part of our lives. We all look at it, for a few minutes every day. So they're going to consume that content there. So you should post your best content in the places that they can stumble across it.
I've developed like the most fine-tuned filter to just flick a little bit faster whenever I see the word promoted on any channel, and it's the ones that look most like an organic post that I'm like most liable to actually like stare at for a little bit,
Yeah, no, it's true. But frankly, if the content is good and it's relevant and it's targeted, you will get eyeballs on it. It's gonna work well for you, but it's a longer term play. Like, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, like these are places, they're awareness channels for you to deliver content consistently. And people who consume that content, then the algorithm will, work such that you could then deliver a case study in front of them next time because they've consumed some of your more top funnel content. But it's an awareness channel. It's going to take time. Google's an intent channel. People go there when they know what they are looking for. And that's why you target keywords, right? So, there's a time and place for both.
What do you see? You mentioned Instagram right there at the end, but you hadn't before. You were saying Facebook and LinkedIn. Do you see Instagram and Facebook as being the same thing, or are they pretty different and they should be targeted different? And do you think the customer segments within them are different?
That's a good question. And honestly, I don't know if I feel qualified to answer it. So it's, with my strategy team could speak more specifically to it, but I think really what it comes down to, Chris, is where does your audience go to hang out online, to consume content? And, with Instagram, it's a very visual platform, right? So if the thing you sell, like robotics is probably a good example. Pretty cool. I mean, there's an interesting visual there. And if that's the case and your audience is there, like for that reason, it may work well for you. But there are a lot of things that factor in, just how much you're going to pay to expose yourself to this much audience, and
like how do they rank? Is like LinkedIn the most or the least expensive comparative to Facebook and Instagram?
LinkedIn's going to be significantly more expensive than Facebook. Now, so it really depends. Like this is getting a little bit, into the, out of my, the depth of my expertise as opposed to the strategists on my team who could talk about this all day. But, there's probably a certain price point for your product which might be somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000, where if what you sell costs less than that, it's probably going to be hard to see a return running at, paid content on LinkedIn, because,
just that expensive.
Yeah. I mean, it can be, it's, every situation is different, but, Facebook, I want to say is probably going to cost you 10 to 20% of what LinkedIn's going to cost you at this point in time. And in a lot of cases, you can reach the same audience or maybe even a bigger audience. Depends on the job title and who that type of person really is, what their ideal customer profile looks like. So I think the first thing you need to do is figure out, where can I reach my audience? Where are they actually active? And then you start looking at, okay, now let's compare costs here. And you probably need to just do some experimenting, frankly. And
maybe.
You won't know until you actually start running some ads.
Yep. One of the big ones I wanted to ask you is around the whole idea of customer segmentation, and just a little bit of background on it. Like, we're kind of in an emerging segment, at least with collaborative robots within our market, where, there is huge manufacturers out there that are adopting these things, but the job titles don't always belie the people who are involved with it. And then there's also small and medium-sized businesses where, it could be the CEO that's like, the hands-on guy that's doing the cobots. So it's really hard to target. Like, even if you are trying to create a form on a website to have someone self-identify themselves, you can have them say, what's your company? What's the size of your company? What's your title? And it doesn't tell you really a lot about that person, and at least towards their customer segment. So, maybe this is a loaded question, but like, is there other types of information or things that you can ask of people to help segment them themselves if they're self-identifying, or generally if you're kind of just looking at your own database that may be a little bit less detailed? How do you segment customers out in such a complex, B2B sale?
Yeah, that's tough. That's a great question. I don't know if I'm going to have a satisfactory answer for you on the spot, but if it's a form that's like, an RFQ form or a request a consultation form or something like that, I think it's fair to ask a few extra questions.
Right.
Do you have a project in the works? What, describe it a little bit. You could ask questions about size of company or something. You could probably also just get that stuff by digging on ThomasNet or LinkedIn or whatever. So, sometimes you're probably just having to, like, I have a process I go through where when we get a new inbound lead, regardless of whether it's just a newsletter subscribe or it's somebody requesting a consultation, like, first thing I do is I jump over to the company website, I jump over to LinkedIn, I look at their profile and their job title and how they describe themselves. I look at the company profile, how many, do 10 employees work here or 500? Because that'll probably tell you something about the authority and buying power that person has, despite their job title. So probably, to some extent, different people would probably answer this question differently, but to some extent, I would say there's probably still a manual component to that. But yeah, it's a tough one because I deal with the same thing in my world, where there are times where I'm talking to a marketing director because it's a global organization and the CEO, that person's never even talked to the CEO, and there's most situations I'm talking to the CEO. So it just kind of depends. So.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many times where somebody will come in and like their title will be something completely innocuous, like, like process engineer. But really, if you go and read it, it's like all their projects are incorporated 25 collaborative robots, or just, became the robotics expert for my company. Right. And it's like the job titles are lagging behind, what the real industry trend is in some ways. And so it's really hard to target by job.
It's like not automation engineer is like is a pretty new title. And a lot of companies don't even have that. I see it more and more, especially if you start scrolling through LinkedIn, you'll see it more, but I think that there's a lot of people on the floor that are truly automation engineers, and that's what their specialty is, but that's not their title. So to target that individual, they might just be maintenance, maintenance engineer or process engineer or something like that, historically would have been something a little bit different, but now has become automation engineer. So,
yeah. And an interesting thing that I found, at least, in my own just personal work life and the people that I'm interacting with, the real techie guys don't tend to be on LinkedIn. They tend to maybe have a LinkedIn profile, but they probably aren't on LinkedIn. I tend to find them on Instagram though. Like if I can find them, they're usually on Instagram. And I think that's pretty interesting. I think LinkedIn is really good for sales professionals, really good for marketing, really good for anything on the business side of things. Once you get to a certain level within a company, it's like a requirement. But a lot of the people who are like the doers that would influence a lot of the buying decisions for robotics probably are not that.
I don't know if it's like always the case, but it's definitely, or like a probably in there. I think but it's definitely statistically way higher than especially like sales and marketing. I mean, if you're selling to sales and marketing individuals, LinkedIn is a fantastic place to be, branding yourself and pushing yourself, because you're just gonna, like, if there's a sales guy out there and now he knows about your product and he can go out and sell it or something, it's great. But I find that, if your target audience is to get directly into a manufacturing like engineer, it may be a little bit more difficult. I do wonder if, say, like Facebook would be a place where they might leisurely go, because they might be at their company for 30 years and they don't care about LinkedIn, because it's just for them, they always looked at that's their resume. They're not going to change companies. So I think a lot of people's perception is that LinkedIn is to find your next job, where it's really, LinkedIn has done a great job rebranding itself from like 5-10 years ago into a place where it's just a professional social network, right? Where you want to consume everything there. It's not how do you find a new job anymore. But I think a lot of people still have that perception. So they go to consume content in different spaces. So it's interesting to think about what kind of a return you can get from marketing on Facebook. Do you have any like use cases that you can talk to from the customer base that you have, of like customers that have been more successful on Facebook versus, say, LinkedIn?
Sure. So yeah, and I think one point I'd make here is, what I'm hearing from you guys is exactly what I'd say. Like, you have to figure out where your audience is first, like if the types of engineers you're targeting are just not present on LinkedIn, well, you can get into the ad builder tools in either of these platforms and at least learn, are these profiles even exist? And then observation, you can start digging around and try to get a sense for whether they're actually active. And then you run some experiments and you learn, are you getting any kind of engagement? Are these, you could post a video on LinkedIn and put a paid budget behind it and gather data about, what percentage of this video on average are people watching? If it's a minute long video and on average, less than 25% of it's being watched, that's showing there's not engagement. If 75% of it's getting watched consistently and you're targeting specifically this type of engineer, well, you can get a sense that, it's resonating in front of the right people.
It's all relative at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as, I guess your question was use cases or examples of when LinkedIn would have made sense versus Facebook for existing, clients of ours. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you can talk about your like clients that you have. I mean, I'm sure you can talk about some of them. So just was curious of maybe, discussing about what was successful for one and how another company's was a little bit different and why.
Yep. So I think, one example I'd use is, we have one client that I'm not going to mention them by name, but they're a machine manufacturer, and the price point of their machine is very high. It's, we're talking about, one sale is $500,000 to $1 million. Right. So it's for them, if they can get in front of the right audience, which we were able to target the right audience on LinkedIn, you can see a positive ROI there. And so, their audience was there and active. The right buyer personas were were present on that channel. And again, the price point of the product was high enough that, just generating a few conversations is going to give them probably enough pipeline to, to justify the spend. And then you trace it all the way through to revenue. And then you can really, make a determination on ROI after some period of time. You got to let it play out for a bit. I've got another client that the average price point of their product is $7,000, and they almost are more like a B2C company, even though they are B2B. Like they're not going to play on LinkedIn with any kind of success. And so, for them, they're targeting, they've got a product that goes into like dentist offices and schools and, areas where large amounts of people congregate. And so, for them, it wouldn't have made sense to go to LinkedIn, but on Facebook, we can reach those people. Like those people are there, and we can do so in a way that, you get exposure in front of people at a price point that will actually generate a positive ROI. So, I'm not getting too detailed there, I guess, but that it's kind of one way to look at it.
Really good to know. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's another website out there, and for a while it was the 4th largest website in the world. I don't know if it still is or not, but it's called Reddit. And I don't know if it's possible to target people on that, or if it's just like a chasm of anonymity. Have you ever considered paid advertisement on that platform before?
I don't have any experience with Reddit, honestly. If you had someone from my strategy team up here, they'd probably be able to speak to it to some extent, but it hasn't been a part of any strategy we've delivered. I'm not saying it doesn't work or is wrong. It just hasn't been part of a mix for us. How about you guys? Have you played there at all?
I know I use it all the time, but I've never gotten served a valid ad on it. I think it's just really interesting because like Reddit by definition is like anonymous, like you kind of don't ever let anyone know who you are on it. Mm-hmm. Most of the times at least, but then I'm also consuming it as much as any other platform.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's a great question.
Sued by the SEC and then
Yep.
Question for you, maybe a loaded one. Are trade shows dead?
Our trade show's dead. I don't like to say anything's dead, frankly. I try to avoid making
bold predictions only.
No, I don't think they're dead. I think they are. I think they will come back around. I don't think that you will see the same level of attendance. I think people have realized that you don't need trade shows to be able to reach an audience. The last year has proven that companies can survive and still thrive without trade shows. Some have suffered more than others, but I think that I think you'll see them come back. I think you'll see lower attendance. I think you're going to see companies not willing to invest as much as they had, or maybe in as many shows. So I would expect this to be a trigger to drive more manufacturers to really look hard at their digital strategy and see what.
Isn't there a chance that they come back stronger than ever because people are just missing the face-to-face interaction? Granted, that means that there would have to be not like a slow reopening of people being a little, like only a certain, like 10% of the population gets more comfortable and then another 10% gets more comfortable. But let's say there's sometime in the next year where it's really unhinged and everyone, like we reach herd immunity, right? Isn't there a chance that this comes for a short period of time, that trade shows come back stronger than ever because everybody wants to get out and go? Like the people that were like, sick of trade shows are so excited to go back, and you get customers that have been locked in front of their desk or on their manufacturing floor and have been
go shopping. Yeah.
They want to go out and interact and see things that they haven't been able to see in a different way. And they just go gangbusters to record numbers for trade shows.
I think it certainly could happen, but I don't think that'll be sustained over time.
I just think they're if I'm a company and I look at it from like a gamble, I feel like there's a gamble that can be made here that says, all right, once enough people are willing to go back to shows, let's invest more than another company will invest for a very short period of time to see if we can't sneak like market share percentage just based on that short window of a lot of more people going to trade shows. Then I think in 3 years from now, I think they might be dead.
Yeah. I mean, geez, when I'm halfway, we're recording this in about the last week of going into the last week of April. I'm halfway through my vaccinations, and when I'm good to go, and my family is like, yeah, I'm going to be traveling. I'm going to be looking for opportunities to be in restaurants and to be traveling, and like, when it's safe and acceptable. And so, I wouldn't be surprised, Zach, if there is some surge in that kind of thing very early on. But, once things level out and, we're 2 years out from now, do I think that trade show attendance will look the same as it did pre-2020? I don't think so. That's my gut.
Yeah. No, I think I think that's probably true. I know that I was trying to look it up as we were got to wrap up here in a minute, but Airbnb posted some numbers about having like record number of reservations ahead of time, way more than normal, because they're booking them out in the summer going, I'll have my 2 doses of the vaccine by then. So we're booking it. And the rates have gone up, insane. Like if you look at Cape Cod is a big place people go in New England, and it's completely booked. Like there's no even places to go. So
yeah. Well, here's the question: because I mean that makes total sense to me. Are people going to be so excited that they can travel again that they're going to be saying, "I just can't wait to go to this trade show," or are they going to be rushing out to get on vacation and be happy that they've learned how to conduct business for a little bit from a distance to at least some extent? So I don't know. It's to be determined, I guess, but we'll see.
I'm going to steal the last thought on this because I think that it's just going to cause a consolidation. Like a lot of other industries, I think
Probably.
that there's going to be way less trade shows than there was before. There's going to be some massive ones, and people are still going to try and make it out to those. But like a lot of the other industries, it's just going to consolidate into a few major ones.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. The ones that do survive, hopefully, will become that much more valuable, and we'll see.
Yeah, Joe, we know you got to run. Thank you so much for your time today. That was an awesome, fast-paced 45 minutes with you. So
yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to do it again sometime, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to join you.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Joe.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right, guys. We'll see you.
Yeah.